There are two kinds of silence in my father's house: the heavy, unforgiving quiet of a grudge, and the brittle, expectant quiet right before the cruelty begins. That Christmas day, we were drowning in the second kind. The air itself felt thin, stretched taut over a frame of unspoken resentments. My daughter, Lily, seemed to be the only one in the room still breathing normally. Her small hands, clutching a stack of hand-drawn cards, were steady. Mine, resting on my lap, were trembling. I hadn't wanted to come back. 2 years. 2 years since I had packed my life and my then 5-year-old daughter into a sputtering sedan and driven away from the wreckage of my marriage and the cold indifference of my family. But Lily had asked, "Mommy, do I have a grandpa?" she'd whispered one night. Her question, a small, perfect stone dropped into the quiet pond of our life. And then, "Can we see him for Christmas?" Against every self-preservation instinct I had honed. I said yes. I suppose a foolish part of me hoped that the sight of her, this bright, beautiful piece of my heart, might thaw something in him. It didn't. From the moment we arrived, the chill was palpable. My father, Arthur, sat enthroned in his worn leather armchair by the fire, a glass of amber liquid sweating in his hand. He didn't stand. He offered a curt nod, his eyes flicking over Lily with a disinterest that was more painful than any insult. I saw a flicker of something in his gaze, a brief, sharp intake of breath as he met her eyes, which are the same deep blue as my mother's were. Then the mask of indifference slammed back down. His cruelty, I knew, was a fortress built around the hollow where his grief lived. My sister, Beatrice, offered a hello that sounded more like an accusation, her eyes scanning Lily's carefully chosen dress for flaws. My mother fluttered, her anxiety a constant, humming thing beneath the surface, forcing pleasantries that wilted in the frosty air. I steered Lily through it all. My smile, a tight, aching thing plastered on my face. This was for her. I could endure it for her. Lily, oblivious or perhaps just bravely ignoring the undercurrents, was a small beacon of warmth. She moved through the room, handing out the drawings she'd spent a week perfecting. One for my mother, one for Beatrice. When she approached my father, she paused, her small form looking even smaller before his hulking silence. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," she said, her voice clear and sweet. He didn't look at her. He simply extended a hand, a dismissive gesture, and took the envelope without a word, placing it on the table beside him as if it were a coaster. My heart ached for her, for the hope she so freely offered to a man who had long ago forgotten how to receive it. Then, the moment I had been dreading arrived. Arthur grunted, leaning over to retrieve a large, immaculately wrapped box from under the tree. The silver paper shimmered under the lights, topped with a perfect red bow. "Here," he said, holding it out in Lily's direction. "For the kid." Her eyes widened. A genuine, breathtaking smile lit up her face. "For me," she breathed. She looked at me, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. Asking for permission. I nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening into a cold, hard stone. She scrambled to the floor, pulling the box into her lap. She treated the wrapping paper with a reverence that was almost painful to watch, carefully peeling back the tape, her small fingers trying to preserve the perfect bow. She wanted to savor this moment of being seen, of being given something beautiful. Then, she lifted the lid. She peered inside, and I watched the light in her face go out. It happened in slow motion. First, confusion. As her brows knitted together, she reached a tentative hand into the box, her fingers searching the empty cardboard bottom. She looked up at me, her blue eyes wide with a question she didn't know how to ask. The box was empty. There was no tissue paper. No toy. Nothing. Just air. Just a hollow, mocking space where a gift should have been. Before I could find my voice, before I could rush to her and shield her, my father let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor, it was the sound of a lock clicking into place. "Well, what did you expect?" he said, leaning back in his chair, swirling the ice in his glass. "The world doesn't owe you anything just for existing." My blood turned to ice. Beatrice snorted from the couch. "What did you expect?" "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Gratitude just for showing up. She's just like you. Always expecting a handout." The word struck me like a physical blow. I looked at Lily. She wasn't crying, but her lower lip was trembling, and her small shoulders were rigid. She stared into the empty box as if it held the answer to a terrible riddle. In that moment, the years of swallowing my pride, of making excuses for their coldness, it all curdled into a hot, blinding rage. But before the dam could break, Lily did something that changed everything. She carefully closed the flaps of the empty box, placed it beside her, and stood up. She looked directly at my father. Her chin held high, and her voice, though quiet, resonated through the stunned silence of the room. "That's okay," she said. "I have a gift for you." "Two." The whole room held its breath. The smug smirk on Arthur's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Beatrice, mid-sneer, actually closed her mouth. They had expected tears. A tantrum. A hasty and humiliated retreat. They had not expected this quiet, unshakable dignity from a 7-year-old. Lily walked to the coat rack by the door where her small red jacket hung. She didn't reach into her pocket. Instead, she reached for a folded envelope she had given my father earlier, the one he had placed on the end table without a glance. She picked it up as if it were the most important document in the world. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I wanted to stop her, to scoop her up and run from this house and never look back. "Lily." "Honey," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Maybe not now. We can just go." She turned to me, and in her deep blue eyes, I saw a profound and unnerving calm. It wasn't the defiance of a child. It was the resolve of someone who knew they were doing the right thing. "It's okay, Mommy," she said softly, then turned back to her grandfather. She crossed the room, the folded paper held out in front of her with both hands. A sacred offering. Arthur watched her approach. Avare. Irritated expression hardening his features. "What is it now?" he grumbled, taking a long swallow of his drink. "Decided to draw me a snowman after all." She didn't answer. She simply stood before his chair and held the paper out to him. For a long moment, he ignored it, staring at her as if she were a puzzle he had no interest in solving. Finally, with an exasperated sigh, he snatched it from her hand. He unfolded it carelessly with one hand, his eyes still clouded with impatience, and then he looked down at the paper. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The color drained from his face. His jaw went slack, the muscles around his mouth losing their tight. Bitter set. The arrogance, the coldness, all of it evaporated, leaving behind the face of a shocked, vulnerable old man. His hand, the one holding the whiskey glass, began to tremble. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor, at first, then more pronounced, until the ice cubes inside the thick tumbler began to clatter against the glass. The small, sharp sounds echoing in the dead silence of the room. He didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He just stared, unable to bear the suspense. I rose from my seat and moved to stand behind Lily, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. I looked over his arm at the drawing. It wasn't a snowman. It wasn't a childish scribble of a Christmas tree. It was a detailed, lovingly rendered pencil sketch of two people dancing on a stone patio. surrounded by rose bushes. It was my mother and father. Younger. So much younger. Caught in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. My mother was laughing, her head thrown back, a gardenia tucked behind her ear. My father was looking down at her. And his face, the face Lily had drawn from a story, not a memory, held a look of such unguarded adoration, it stole the breath from my lungs. I had told Lily about that photograph once. A long time ago. A bittersweet memory from a happier time. It had been his favorite. It had burned, along with so many other pieces of our past, in the fire that took the old garden shed a decade ago. He thought it was gone forever. And here it was, resurrected from the ashes by the careful, loving hand of the granddaughter he had just tried to break. Lily's small voice cut through the spell. "I remember you told me Grandma loved to dance," she said to him, her voice filled not with accusation, but with a simple, heartbreaking sincerity. "I wanted you to have a picture of her smiling." The clattering of the ice stopped. Arthur set the glass down on the table with a shaking hand. He stared at the drawing for another long moment, his throat working. Then, with a slow, deliberate reverence that was utterly alien to him, he carefully folded the paper along its original creases and placed it on the table beside his chair. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff, like an old automaton. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Lily. He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy on the old hardwood floor, down the hall, until we heard the soft, final click of his bedroom door shutting. The silence he left in his wake was heavier than before. Beatrice stared at the empty doorway, her face a mask of disbelief. I knelt down in front of my daughter, my own eyes blurring with tears. Her small face was tilted up at me, filled with a child's earnest concern. "Did I do something wrong?" "Mommy," she whispered. I pulled her into a fierce hug, burying my face in her soft hair. "No, sweetheart," I choked out, my voice thick with an emotion, too big to name. "You did something brave. You gave him back a memory." My father did not return. The heavy silence in the room was eventually broken by Beatrice, who let out a sharp Lisa, incredulous laugh. "Well, that was quite the performance," she said, her voice laced with her familiar brand of acidic sarcasm. She looked from the empty doorway to me. Her eyes narrowed. "What did you put her up to? Clara, did you spend weeks coaching her on how to manipulate him with some sad little drawing?" "Don't," I said, my voice low and shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in years. "Don't you dare." My mother began fluttering nervously, wringing her hands as she stood from the couch. Now, let's not fight. It's Christmas. Arthur is just tired. He gets overwhelmed." She forced a bright, brittle smile. "Dinner is almost ready. Why don't we all just move to the dining room? Everything is fine." Everything was not fine. The chasm that had defined our family for years had just been cracked wide open by a 7-year-old with a pencil, and my mother's solution was to cover it with a tablecloth. But to argue would be to create the scene my father's absence had already orchestrated. For Lily's sake. I nodded, took her hand, and we followed them into the dining room. The meal was an exercise in silent torture. The clinking of silverware against porcelain was deafening. My father's empty chair at the head of the table was a black hole, pulling all the air and warmth from the room. It was a physical presence, a monument to the man's towering, suffocating grief. Beatrice made a few pointed comments about people who run away from their responsibilities, clearly aimed at me. But I didn't take the bait. I focused on cutting Lily's roast beef into small pieces, on making sure she drank her milk, on creating a tiny, impenetrable bubble of normalcy for the two of us at our end of the table. Lily was quiet, picking at her food, her eyes occasionally straying to the empty chair. She knew. Children always do. They feel the shape of what's missing. We left early the next morning, I packed our single bag while Lily was still sleeping. The first rays of dawn painting the guest room a cold, stérile gray. I told my mother we had to get back for a friend's gathering. A lie so thin, it was transparent. But she accepted it with relieved politeness. She pressed a foil-wrapped plate of leftovers into my hands at the door. For the drive, she said. Beatrice didn't even come out of her room. There was no sign of my father. He remained a ghost behind a closed door. The car was quiet on the ride home. The hum of the tires on the highway. A soothing drone. Snow began to fall. Soft, thick flakes that clung to the windshield before being swept away. I reached over and took Lily's small hand, and she laced her fingers through mine. I thought about the last time I'd truly fought with my father. It was a month after my mother's funeral. The house had been suffocating in his grief. He'd stopped talking, stopped eating, just sat in that chair with a glass in his hand. I, raw with my own sorrow, had screamed at him, accused him of giving up, of drowning in his memories while the rest of us were still trying to swim. He'd looked at me with dead eyes and said, "What would you know about it? You just run away." We hadn't spoken a real word to each other since. He was right. In a way, I had run. But what I saw now, what Lily had so innocently revealed, was that we were both wrong. I had demanded he forget his pain, and he had refused to remember his joy. We were trapped on opposite sides of the same grief. Lily's drawing wasn't an accusation or a demand. It was a bridge. It was a quiet reminder that the man who loved my mother so fiercely was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the rubble of his own sorrow. She hadn't tried to fix him. She'd simply shown him a picture of himself that he thought was lost forever. When we finally pulled into our own small driveway, the sense of relief was so profound it was almost dizzying. This was our home, a place of warmth and gentle silences. Not cold, weaponized ones. As I unlocked the door, Lily, who had been quiet for hours, looked up at me. "Is Grandpa going to be okay?" she asked. Her voice small. I knelt down and brushed a stray snowflake from her hair. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said all weekend. "But I think you gave him something he needed." We stepped inside, leaving the cold and the ghosts behind us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared to feel. It wasn't quite hope. Not yet. It was just a quiet space, waiting to see what might grow. For 4 days, the silence from my father's house was absolute. It was the familiar, heavy kind of quiet I had grown up with. The kind that signified a settled grudge. A part of me expected nothing less. People like my father didn't change overnight. Miracles, I knew, were for other families. We settled back into our small, quiet routine. We made hot chocolate, read books piled high on the floor, and watched the snow pile up outside our window. I didn't mention the trip, and neither did Lily. It was an unspoken agreement to let the memory rest, to not poke at the bruise. But I could see the questions in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. Then, on the 5th day, it appeared, a small, square box wrapped in plain brown paper, sitting on our doorstep. There was no return address, just Lily's name written in a shaky, unfamiliar script. My heart leaped into my throat. Lily saw it from the window, and her face, a mixture of fear and hope, was a perfect mirror of my own. Was this another test? Another cruel joke? We brought it inside. The melting snow from the box, creating a small puddle on our welcome mat. "Should I open it?" she whispered, her hand hovering over the string. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Her small fingers worked at the knot, and the paper fell away to reveal a simple, unadorned wooden box. It wasn't new. The wood was dark and smooth with age, the corners softened by time. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn, dark blue velvet, was a small, antique silver locket on a delicate chain. It was oval-shaped, with tiny, faded engravings of roses around the edge. Lily picked it up, her breath catching in a soft gasp. It swung gently from her fingers, catching the light. She fumbled with the tiny clasp, and it opened. On one side, protected by a sliver of glass, was a perfect, professionally miniaturized copy of her drawing the image of her grandparents dancing. On the other side, it was empty. A clean, polished silver surface. Waiting, tucked beneath the velvet, was a small, folded piece of cardstock. Lily handed it to me. The handwriting was the same as on the box, spidery and uncertain. It said only 2 words, "For remembering." There was no signature. We didn't need one. Lily clutched the locket to her chest, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She didn't say anything. She just held it. This tangible piece of a past she had never known. This proof that her gift had been received. The empty space in the locket felt like a question, a possibility. It wasn't an ending. It was an invitation. A week later, another letter arrived. This one was in a standard white envelope, addressed to me. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was just 3 short lines. Clara, you didn't run away. You found a better place to stand. I was wrong. She is a good girl. That was all. No apology for the years of coldness. No explanation for the empty box. But it was more than I had ever expected. He had remembered our last fight, the ugly words I had thrown at him in my own grief, and he had answered them. I sank onto the kitchen chair, the letter clutched in my hand. And for the first time since my mother died, I cried for my father. Not for the cruel, bitter man he had become, but for the man trapped underneath, the one who could still, after all this time, admit he was wrong. The locket now hangs around Lily's neck. She rarely takes it off. Sometimes I see her holding it, her thumb stroking the smooth silver, and I know she's thinking of him. There have been no more letters. No phone calls. My father is not a man for grand gestures, but the silence from his house feels different now. It's no longer the heavy quiet of a grudge. It's the quiet of a space being held, of a door left unlocked. It's the beginning of a fragile peace. Lily taught me something that Christmas. I thought I needed to protect her from the world's cruelty. But she didn't need my shield. She walked into the heart of our family's pain armed with nothing but kindness and a memory. And she changed everything. She didn't fight back. She didn't demand an apology. She simply gave a gift that reminded a sad, lonely man that he was once, and could still be, someone worth remembering. And that, I've learned, is the most powerful magic of all. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet power of kindness in a world that often feels cold, please consider sharing it with someone who might need a little bit of light today. Sometimes the smallest gesture's a comment, a like, a share can be a bridge, just like a child's drawing. Subscribe for more stories that explore the complicated, messy, and beautiful truth of what it means to be human. And remember, it's never too late to offer someone a memory, or to give them a chance to make a new one.